I'm delighted to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of the Cameron Mackintosh Visiting Professor of Contemporary Theatre for 2022-23, Adjoa Andoh. It's wonderful to see so many of you here and also online. I know that that's up and running. This is the first Cameron Mackintosh lecture since 2019 because of the pandemic. Unfortunately, Sir Cameron can't be with us this evening, but we're very grateful to him for making this possible in the first place by founding this professorship in 1990, which, as it happens, is long before our current undergraduates were born. The first holder was Stephen Sondheim, who sadly died this year. Since then, 26 distinguished individuals have made their own individual unique contribution to the college through this professorship, and I am confident that our most recent professor will do the same. And at this point, I'll pass on to Dr. Fram Dinshaw to introduce Adjoa properly. Thank you very much.
Good evening and welcome. Adjoa has just told me that her lecture is going to be a full hour, so we may be slightly longer than some of you had planned. Feel free, as you would in the theatre, to vote with your feet, but I think it would be a great mistake.
Best bits at the end.
I, therefore, am not going to spend a long time introducing Adjoa, our 28th Cameron Mackintosh professor. It doesn't seem so long since Stephen Sondheim was sitting in that chair, but perhaps it does to others. She is a very remarkable figure in the British theatre, a classical actress whose career has coincided with a revolutionary moment when women can play men, when diverse actors of all kinds play parts which would not previously, one would not previously have seen them in. And her talent has really been at the forefront of this. And I think her title today, Swinging the Lens, could not be more topical. So without further ado, Adjoa.
It's an hour. So, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm very excited about this year. I'm very excited to see so many friends, old and new, such a mixed congregation, one could say. Now, one of my favourite exercises to do in a workshop with a bunch of kids or adults or whoever. So, what does this say? Conversation. Connection. Okay. What does this say?
Alienation.
Conflict, alienation. What? One at a time, somebody? Disengagement. What does that say? Broken?
Present government.
Far be it from me, Nick. Chaos? Okay, lovely, thank you. I'll just put these back for me and Fram. So, what's interesting about this exercise? Super simple. We read the story on the stage and we fill in the information. We bring ourselves to the story, we bring our experiences to the story, and we tell our own story with it. For me, there's something about audiences and the multiplicity of who we are, or the homogeneity of who we are, that affects the way we read a story. And I'm really interested in that. Another favourite exercise. Take a word, home, flag, mother, warmth, fear, journey, family, father, food, sleep. And ask the group to write a short piece on that word and watch the multiplicity of responses. As a dramatist, be it as an actor, a writer, or a director, what's the number one thing I think about? Perspective. Where's my lovely assistant? Matthew, give us the first picture. Oh, steady the buffs. I think you've got to come closer. Marvellous. Swinging the lens. So that's the name of my production company. That's our logo. As many of you will know, when filming, you change the lens size on the camera for a different size of shot. You pause to swing the lens, replace one lens with another. I'm interested in that multiplicity of lenses. Of course I am. What happens when we view things through a different lens. I am made up of a multiplicity of family and personal lenses and perspectives. So swinging that story lens to a different perspective piques my interest. I also like the wordplay of swinging the lens. Sounds a bit like swinging the lead, which some of you will know means, in essence, pulling a sickie, bunking off, not being at work. 40 years ago, I worked for Lloyds Bank for a year and a day, during which time the Falklands War was prosecuted. Several of my banking colleagues in the Territorial Army were keen to get called up so that they could go and give the Orgis some. Needless to say, the days were long, and I would frequently gaze in horrified astonishment at a clock that was still only reading 9:30 a.m. Would the endless day never end? I am happy to report that in the main, since changing careers, I never feel the need for that dispiriting clock watching, since I no longer work for a living. I am permanently at play, swinging the lead from the world of work, perspective and play. Hurrah for my lucky life. Dispiriting. I use that word intentionally. The opposite, I would argue, of my art form's purpose, discipline, and way of being, which is to enliven, to uplift and engage the human spirit by the application of story. My younger brother always remarks on the miracle of our existence. I must clarify that we are by nature and nurture hippies from the West Country, nearest Dole Office, Stroud. The miracle of our existence, of sitting together in this lecture theatre just now, thinking and reflecting in communion while perched on the crusty outer shell of a spinning, boiling ball of gas in the middle of the infinite solar system. Don't lose sight of it, my brother says. The annual miracle of these soft, sun-graced autumnal days. Don't blink. You'll be gone before you know it, my brother says. Glory in the miracle of the everyday. Perhaps story brings the glory into greater focus. Perhaps story allows us to stop clock watching for a moment and see beyond the daily grind horizon. Perhaps story challenges us to dream and strive for the life beyond, offering new horizons that speak into our spirits, calling to the gifts that we possess uniquely. For not every son of a banker needs to continue in the family firm. Perhaps they are innately a delicate ceramicist. Not every child of an actor needs to tread the boards. Perhaps they are a wonderful teacher, as is my eldest. And not every child gets the opportunity to swing the lead, like me. But that would be my dream for all of us, to earn our living engaged in the things we are gifted at, a leaning towards fulfillment, rather than acquisition. Meantime, we storytellers offer what relief, reflection, entertainment, and engagement we can, expanding hearts, minds, and horizons, Another arm of the health service, one could argue, perhaps. So far, so mission statement. How does this storytelling translate on the ground? I want to talk about expanding access and perspective. A few years ago, I directed the third years at Rose Bruford Drama School in a production of The Merchant of Venice. We set the story in a port town, Venice as present-day Lampedusa, and Shylock and his people as Falasha Jews from Ethiopia, who immigrate to Europe, of whom Bassanio assimilates. I thought it worked terrifically well, and felt confirmed by this from one of the mothers of one of the actors, who approached me in tears after a performance to say that we had told her story. She had fled difficult circumstances in Kenya and spent years as a refugee before arriving in the UK. We had, in fact, simply performed the play as written, but the brilliance and the humanity of Shakespeare's storytelling, in combination with the Lampedusa Falasha contextualization, meant the perspective could expand. The lens could be swung to hold multiple stories, whilst being funny, heartbreaking, challenging, textually on point, and thoroughly engaging for all. And now, talking of one of our greatest storytellers, Shakespeare, as I sat down to write this inaugural hello to you, Richard III kept interrupting. Richard III. Oi, me, I'm the story, I'm the kiddie, pay me the attention, see me, hear me. So okay, Richard, Dickie, my boy, you're up. Why? Because stories intrude. They demand our attention. They have things they want us to understand. And why is Dickie in my head? Because in a couple of months, we go into rehearsal with Richard III. And in terms of this expanded story and perspective, Richard feels like a moment for my story. Richard's story, for me, begins with Rosemary Hawley Jarman's novel, The King's Grey Mare. It was a birthday present from my Auntie Lois when I was 9 or 10, I think. It's the story of Richard's sister-in-law, Elizabeth Woodville, who marries Richard's brother, Edward IV, and is reputedly a witch who won her husband through dubious occult practices. We see her rise, court life, the death of her husband, the rise of her brother-in-law, all through the lens of Elizabeth, her needs, her fears, her desires, her triumphs, her disasters. It was a thrilling read. Then rather wonderfully, I came across the sister book in the school library, We Speak No Treason, a quote from the opening scene of Richard III. The novel written entirely from the point of view of those who loved Richard. No evil crookback in their telling of the story. After Rosemary Hawley Jarman's novels, I read Shakespeare's play and was outraged on first reading by what I perceived as the dreadful misrepresentation of Richard. Written in 1592 to 93, who was on the throne? I reasoned. Elizabeth I. Who was her grandfather? Henry VII. Who did Henry VII defeat to become Henry VII? Richard III. Well then, I thought, it stands to reason. Shakespeare has to make Richard out as a baddie to keep Queen Elizabeth sweet, keep the Queen sweet, stay in favour, stay in work. But it's not fair, my tween self declared. That's not who Richard is, and a lifelong love was born. My own sense of it's not fair, of being judged and othered for my appearance, chiming with my perceived sense of Richard's it's not fair. Like the Kenyan mum who came to see The Merchant of Venice, in Shakespeare's story, I heard my own. The doublespeak, on further reading, I began to understand. The doublespeak that lays open the truth of the double life of Richard immediately became visible. We speak no treason, man, Richard asserts to a suspicious Lord Brackenbury. We say the king is wise and virtuous, and his noble queen, well struck in years, fair and not jealous. This is the beauty of drama, of story. The connections and empathies we discover contribute to the mapping of our lives. And now I get the chance to marry my professional life with a small child who still lives within each one of us, I would argue, who has seen the miracle of life and its harsher side, and still cries, "It's not fair." Bruce Springsteen says, behind every great male artist, there is a small boy, arms outstretched, saying, "Daddy, look at me!" And in the song Woodstock, Joni Mitchell sings, "We are stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden." How do we get back to the garden? The Garden of Eden, of creation, of the world. The miracle, the wonder of being, back to our first state of being, intact, open, curious, unsullied by the prejudices and mores of the society into which we have been born. The accident of our births, still thankfully of no significance to us. And yet even that's not quite true. In some places, girl babies continue to be regarded as worthless and expendable. Babies born with both or indeterminate genitalia assigned a gender regardless. Babies born differently abled, patronized, ignored, abandoned. From our earliest moments, society intervenes to box us in, and so it continues. Women in Iran dying and brutalized over a piece of fabric that speaks to their place in the society of the Ayatollahs. Black women in the UK 5 times more likely, while pregnant, than white women to suffer fatal outcomes in maternity care. Trans children over 7 times more likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual peers. Differently abled people still only marginally catered for in the majority of built public spaces. Caste, class, poverty, still the arbiters of life chances and opportunities. Family connections, inheritance, the name that gets you the interview or bars you from the interview, the internship you can or can't afford to do for travel expenses only. The wonder child, sullied by the prejudices and mores of the society into which they have been born. The accident of our birth, the stories we run about people like them. The examples are endless. The real-life consequences of the stories we tell and the perspectives they rely on, full of power. Do those of us of a certain age remember this Guardian newspaper's Point of View advertising campaign from 1986? Let's have a look, Matthew.
An event seen from one point of view gives one impression. Seen from another point of view, it gives quite a different impression. But it's only when you get the whole picture you can fully understand what's going on.
Marvellous. There was a lot of panic at the time about violent skinheads, racist, fascist, dangerous. Here was an advert asking people to park their prejudices and snap judgments and read a story differently, more broadly. Reading stories and their power put me in mind of 2 stories, one from this last week and one from last year. Stories of human responses to trauma, difficulty, and difference. On last Friday's repeat of Desert Island Discs, I am that Radio 4 listener. I listened to the story of Wahid Aryan, an Afghan refugee who lived through the Russian invasion, the rise of the Mujahideen, the bombings, the terror of death, the refugee camps, illegal entrance into this country, incarceration in a young offenders institute, medical school, discouragement, depression, flashbacks, Cambridge, a successful career as a doctor and radiologist, born of a need to survive, through to a family of his own, finding his lost childhood in his own children, seeing himself in the face of a displaced young Afghani girl, and then making the decision to respond to his life in that girl's face by founding a telemedicine charity called Ariane Teleheal, an internet medical service saving lives online by connecting medics in conflict zones and low-resource countries around the world through their smartphones to receive advice on life-threatening cases from volunteer specialists in the UK, Canada, the US, and many other countries. A moving listen and a breathtakingly inspirational story of trauma leading to a desire, a need, to heal. And the other story, the 20-second window into a perspective that has transformed lives and legislation in the United Kingdom. Actress Rose Ayling-Ellis, a fabulous glitter ball winning Strictly Come Dancing contestant, transformed the hearing world's understanding of her life as a deaf woman by the 20 seconds in her couple's choice dance routine where the music stopped and we experienced the world through Rose's lens. Throughout the competition, Rose and her partner Giovanni Panice rehearsed, laughed, cried, danced, and won using speech, touch, and British Sign Language, BSL. As a result, by thousands of percents, the influx of people wanting to join up for signing classes has grown, and BSL is now an officially recognised language which legislation demands must be catered to in all official settings, from police stations to hospital waiting rooms and everything in between. 20 seconds of transformational, silent storytelling. Wahid Ariane, Rose Ayling-Ellis. The power of swinging the lens onto stories that shift our perspectives. Stories are powerful, and ultimately, they are the way we navigate our entire lives, and the way our lives are shaped for us, for good and for ill. They are the maps to our lives. They are how we understand the world. They inform the choices we make as to how we will travel through the world. But whose stories? Who's telling them? Who's hearing them? Clearly, the ages of 13 and 14 were influential years for me. In spite of my love of all things punk, I auditioned as a singer for my first rock band in 1976, an epic fail. But from there discovered Steely Dan, and the soundtrack still of my life, their album, Adjoa. I would sing along, heartfelt with Deacon Blue, the album spinning on my mono record player as I belted out, "They got a name for the winners in the world. I want a name when I lose." As ever, even then, as with Richard III, my curiosity was always with the loser and the unsung. What's their story? That maid, just a bit out of shot, who brings in the tray for the poshos and silently retreats. Where's she going, I wonder? How did she get to work this morning? Is she tired? Who are her people? What food does she like? What's her favourite smell? Do her feet hurt? Chatting with the fabulous actress and national wonder that is Eileen Atkins earlier this year, that interest in the character just out of shot was the inspiration for her creating with Jean Marsh the long-running drama series Upstairs, Downstairs, my generation's equivalent of Downton. One could say that's what Tom Stoppard did with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, the two hapless flunkies trying to make sense of Hamlet and the goings-on in the Danish court. Or one could say the same for the play written by the recently deceased powerhouse that was B. Bandele, Nigerian playwright, novelist, and film director, tragically dead this summer at 54. The character of Peteru in the play Death Catches the Hunter, one of my picks for us to look at this year. Peteru, He's the pianist for the charismatic itinerant preacher, the prophet Emifa, and the increasingly jealous husband of the prophet's chief acolyte, Saratu. Peteru, the sideshow who becomes the main event. The perspective of these sidelined characters is always hugely of interest to me, and increasingly real world necessary. How does an Eton and Oxbridge-educated economist legislate effectively for the increase in universal credit to match or not match inflation, when they may have no lived experience of what a huge difference £20 a week can make to a person's essential needs, their dignity, their ability to be part of society? Well, these days it means they may get the sack. A saved £20 may mean a pair of shoes for a child, a bus pass, more than one meal a day, washing powder for fresh clothes, hot water, the ability to use power to cook. Because he was a refugee, Wahid Arian set up his internet medical service to help save lives. Because he was raised by a working poor single mother, international footballer Marcus Rashford campaigned successfully for free school meals to continue during the holidays, when those who have never needed to rely on a free school meal would have legislated to stop those meals, resulting in holidays meaning a time of hunger for children. Because she is a deaf communicator, Rose Ayling-Ellis understood the power of opening her world to the TV audience in that 20 seconds silent dance. The stories of other people's lives understood can make life and death differences. So here's my pitch as your Cameron Mackintosh Visiting Professor of Contemporary Theatre 2022-23. I want to swing the lens on stories told. Let's reshape some canons and familiarise ourselves with different universes. Let's guide, surprise and inspire each other as we travel through Hilary, Trinity and Michaelmas, and inculcate the notion at this university and beyond that there is such richness to be found in story if we open the embrace wide enough to the multiplicity of who we are, expanding access and perspective. I don't care if English drama or theatre is your academic discipline or simply your thing, come along. To tell stories is to be human, is to breathe. So if you are breathing and interested, from any discipline, from any demographic, your visiting professor needs you. I should do it like that. Your visiting professor needs you. You are welcome, and I warmly invite you to join me. My aim is to serve the whole university and draw in local people interested in swinging the lens on the stories we tell. And a special welcome to Kumba Arts, a local arts organisation who I know have been hoping for many years to make connection and work with the university. It's time. Come Nation Society members, come LGBTQI+ members, come differently abled members, come of colour members, come boffins and coders and engineers, come linguists and musicians and historians, come rugger-buggers and college blues, come flautists and climbers and watercolourists, come one, come all. We need better university-wide conversations. We need better university-wide communication. We need to talk about why there is an Oxford University Drama Society and a BAME, Oxford University Drama Society. We will have that conversation. Look out for our own Cam Mac Visiting Professor of Drama page on the university website. And if you're unsure, even if you are not at college here at St. Catherine's, go to the St. Cat's website. Look out for us during your society's sign-ups this month. Swinging the Lens with Adjoa Andoh, Visiting Professor. I'll be hosting workshops through Michaelmas, Hilary and Trinity terms. I've probably gotten the wrong order. I'm from a comp, what do I know? I'll be hosting workshops on Sundays, tomorrow, the 1st, 23rd of January, May the 28th, and finally, a celebration and showing on June the 4th of excerpts of texts we'll be playing with through the year. And the texts are The Merchant of Venice, surprise, surprise, 1598, William Shakespeare. I feel like I'm reading the football results. The Blinkards, 1915, Kobina. The Motherfucker with the Hat, 2011, Stephen Audley Gurgis. Red Velvet, 2014, Lalita Chakrabarti. And additionally, tomorrow we'll also start to look at Death Catches the Hunter, 1994, B. Bandele. Breath Boom, 1999, Kia Corcoran. And The P Word, 2022, Waleed Akhtar. We'll talk, we'll game, we'll write, we'll share, we'll simply be together, all seen, all heard. And along the way this academic year, I invite you to Liverpool Playhouse or to the Rose Theatre in Kingston to see our Richard III in April and May next year. I'll be making space available during our second week of rehearsals, so we've got to know each other, but we're not yet terrified. Second week of rehearsals, for some of you to come along and watch. I'm also hoping, with Cameron's blessing, slightly side look at Nick here, to set up an annual bursary for a student engaged in storytelling to be supported financially for a little piece of their journey. Because, as we know, art needs cash. Shakespeare was a working man who wanted to stay popular and employed, I assume. As I said, I'm sure that played some part in the version of Richard III he presented to Elizabethan audiences. Keep the Queen sweet, keep the finances sweet, and then, not coming from the moneyed classes through the accident of one's birth, should be no impediment to the exercising of one's gift. To this end, superb science fiction writer and all-round good egg Ben Aronovich and I have a literary award, the Future Worlds Prize, an annual award for unpublished writers of colour working in the speculative fiction and science fiction genres. Our writers get time with agents and publishers and a financial award to buy them time to write. Our first winner, Esme Jikiemi Pearson's debut novel, The Principle of Moments, is published by Golantz next year. Should have happened this year, COVID. Expanding access and perspective. So here are 3 P's for story making that I have found helpful. P for practical. You need to eat while making art. If you're in my rehearsal room and you have a demented elder relative or a small child and you need to go and deal with them, you go and deal with them because art is part of life. We had one performance of Richard II where somebody's dad had gone AWOL and we got a call, oh, steady, we got a call from a pret-a-manger at Marble Arch to say, I think we have your father here. So we held the show till we'd arranged for somebody to go pick up Dad, take Dad home. Because how can you do the play if you're worrying where your father is? So life has to be practical for the art to work. Practice, P for practice. You only improve, find your voice, find your rhythm by creating your own structure and your own work system. So work on your practice. Practicing, intentionally doing the art. In company, alone, in your head, on your laptop, in your notebook, on stage, in a rehearsal room, in a studio. The doing, that's the art. Practical, practice, practicing. In French, the word for rehearsal is répétition. As with all activity, you have to do it over and over all the time to get good at it. Whether that's running a marathon, baking fabulous patisseries, or swinging the lens on our world view. Let's look at some photos, shall we? The man on my right, that one, Walter Tull, 1888 to 1915. He was one of English football's first black players and the British Army's first black officer to command white troops. But over a century since his death, aged 29, during World War I on the battlefields, who knows the name of Walter Tull? He was an orphan, a pioneering forward for Tottenham Hotspur, and one of Northampton Town's best ever players. Lieutenant Walter Tull was the first British-born black army officer and the first black officer to lead white troops, British white troops, into battle. He fought at the Somme in 1916. and became the first black combat officer in the British Army, despite a military rule excluding Negroes from exercising actual command. He was cut down by machine gun fire as he attempted to rally his men, and despite attempts to bring him back to British lines, his body was never found. After the war, Tull's name was one of almost 35,000 recorded on the Arras Memorial to the missing at the Faubourg d'Amiens cemetery. In a letter written by Walter Tull's comrade, Second Lieutenant Donald Henry Pickard, shortly after Walter's death, Pickard says clearly that Walter had been recommended for the Military Cross and had certainly earned it. Next pic. Last week, a statue was unveiled at Plymouth Argyle's ground, Home Park, to this man, Jack Leslie, the first black player to be called up for England duty in 1925. But he was denied his England appearance after selectors discovered his heritage. The Football Association is now awarding Jack Leslie a posthumous honorary cap. The inside left, who scored 137 goals in 400 appearances for Plymouth between 1921 and 1934, died in 1988 and has just now been immortalised in statue. There he is in action. Next pic. And here is Andrew Watson, chap in the centre, 1856 to 1921, who carved out an amazing career as Britain's first black professional footballer. Not only did Watson play for one of Britain's then biggest teams, Queen's Park FC, but he was also the first black international player, capped several times for Scotland, including captaining Scotland to a 6-1 trouncing of England on his international debut in 1881. First black international professional footballer, 1881. He followed that by a 5-1 win as captain in 1888, again for Scotland, again against England. What's the point of these relatively unknown football stories? Had we all known the history and longevity of the contribution of black football players in this country, perhaps there would have been fewer bananas thrown, fewer monkey chants taken up against black players in later years. Perhaps there would have been less racist hostility towards the final 3 penalty takers at last summer's Euros. We have to see it to be it, renowned black filmmaker Spike Lee once said. But we also have to see it to know that we are part of the story and have a right to be included. Next pic. Oh, there they are. It's why in our Richard II, I know I love a Richard, second, third, whatever, at the Globe during the Brexit debate in 2019, I had an entire production made up of women of colour whose antecedents hailed from British colonised countries, from the fight director to the wardrobe mistress to the composer, the writer of the programme notes, Booker Prize winner Bernardine Evaristo, to the publicist, designers, voice coach and the rest of us, co-directors, me and Lynette Linton, and cast. Next pic. Our ancestors, that's all of us, our ancestors all came from lands the British went to and acquired bodies and raw materials that drove the flourishing of the British Empire in science, in technology and the arts. So in Richard II, a love letter to this sceptred isle, we asked, who has a right to be called a citizen? Who made this little island, this precious stone set in the silver sea? Who made it great? We came together to have that conversation. From Israel to Iran, Ghana to China, Jamaica to India, Guyana to Iraq, Barbados to Mauritius, Trinidad to Cameroon. This was the provocation. In this telling of the story of Richard II and the nation he fought to retain, every contributor bar Shakespeare himself is a woman of colour. Now I'm embarrassed because you're here, Michael. In a production, Michael Billington hailed, saying, by casting an iconic English history play with women of colour, this production immediately makes a strong political statement. It's a reminder that Shakespeare is available to everyone. Even more striking, is the way the production demonstrates that the play's modernity emerges through a vivid articulation of the text, hooray, rather than any show-off directorial concept. If one definition of a first-rate Shakespeare production is that it makes one view the play afresh, this pioneering show eminently passes the test. So, for me, job done. That's all I ever want, to welcome everyone in and say, have another look. What does this story mean to you? To the community of audience you are watching and listening with, and to the world around you. Of course, it's all I ever want. I am the small child who asserts it's not fair, who wants to be welcomed in, not allowed to be present under sufferance, not to be tolerated, but welcomed, invited. Here's a poster from a company I co-founded in the early 1990s with Polly Irvin, Wild Iris. And this poster came from our production of Lover to Loss by female wit Catherine Trotter, with which we hope to invite and welcome a new generation of audiences to the joys of restoration comedy. I had a lot more hair then. To grow up loving Dickens, loving the female wits, loving Shakespeare, to have a history teacher for a mother and a former journalist for a father, to know the stories around our lives to be wider and deeper than ever acknowledged or portrayed, to know as an actor that I was never able to play the characters I was raised to love, nor to play the reality of people like me or my friends or my loved ones. Well, it's not fair. So Polly and I started Wild Iris to widen our storytelling embrace. And now, to the wide embrace, fueling all of this, my family. The two Jessie Pickerings from Lincolnshire. Big Jessie, my great-grandmother, little Jessie, my nana, for both of whom my daughter Jessie, sitting there, is named. And Grandad, Joseph Pickering, my great-grandfather, who fought in the Boer War. He was a private in the cavalry and was put on a treadmill for 48 hours for taking a whip away from an officer who was beating a horse. He came home from the war a pacifist. Next. That's my grandfather, George Alwyn Ripley, who was a farm labourer from a long line of Yorkshire sheep farmers fallen on hard times, who ran away to sea to change his life. He was a merchant seaman, bombed into the water during World War II. He worked for Cunard and rose to be the chief engineer on the QE2. That's Mum, top left. Nana Jessie gave birth to Mum in the cellar of a Salvation Army hospital in Liverpool during an air raid in 1941. Mum was so underweight she had to be fed every 2 hours for weeks. Nana would say, "Your mother nearly killed me." "Never mind the Nazis, Nana." Mum did okay though, didn't you? Here's my other grandmother. Here's Miss Mercy Dadsey, Mama, my father's mother. She played guitar in a palm court orchestra in 1920s Cape Coast, in what is now Ghana. Dad says his earliest memory is of her playing guitar and singing to him. When my brother and I were little, Dad would bring his guitar up to our bedroom every night and sing to us. My brother is a musician and composing the music for Richard III. Here is Mama married to Papa, my grandfather, Mr. John Hagan, an agricultural surveyor for cocoa palm plantations across the then Gold Coast. He and Mama would head off on his motorbike, cross-country, surveying the crops and the land. Cocoa has always been big business in Ghana. And here's my dad, in his late teens, dreaming of his future career in journalism, with his next youngest sister, Auntie Grace. That clacking is me, isn't it? I'm whittering on, going, where's that noise coming from? Can you still hear me all right, though? The diaphragm is engaged. Okay. So sorry. Yes, Dad and Auntie Grace. Auntie Grace, who travelled to Paris, New York, London, Milan in the 1960s with empty suitcases in search of the latest fashions to stock up her boutique store in downtown Accra. Auntie Grace can still take one look at you, size you up, and have an outfit made up for you in a matter of days that will fit you like a glove. This is what family life looked like in the 1960s. I give you the curtains. That's me on the lap. Oh, clearly it's me. That's me on the lap of my great aunt, Auntie Leah, who absolutely poisoned my grandmother against my mother marrying an African. Mum was thrown out, and none of the family attended my parents' wedding. But when I was born, whose lap was I eternally on? Auntie Leah's. Always a slash of red lipstick and a cigarette on the go. I thought she was terrifically glamorous. Thank you. And me and the parents in Leeds. My dress was green with appliqued red strawberries. I remember picking it out to wear for the special family portrait. Costume, clearly always important. And then my brother arrived. Clearly, he's got the music in him. And I'm making notes even then. And this is where we grew up. I took this last weekend. This is the Bluebell Wood, where I would disappear to read Emile and the Detectives, the Just William series, the Secret Seven books, all firm favourites. To this day, the sight of cow parsley in the hedgerows along a narrow South Gloucestershire lane can make me cry. Similarly, with the red earth of an untarmacked Accra street. I am from land, people. These are my roots and my story. I was a punk at 13. In 1977, I hit the high spot. I saw The Clash, Richard Hell and the Voidoids, and French all-girl punk band The Loos, The Holes, at the Bristol Exhibition Centre. I am still that punk, but I'm also a licensed reader in the Church of England, a mother, a grandmother, an actor, a director, Ghanaian, West Country, with a bit of no-nonsense Yorkshire. A lifetime Leeds United supporter, married, bisexual, loves sport, enthusiastic but fairly hopeless, dyspraxic, pescatarian, owner of an ancient, arthritic, blind black Labrador. So why the trawl through the family photo archive? I suppose to use myself briefly as an illustration of all the stories we are, and how often the richness, the wisdom, the depth of all we are is lost. We must hold on to these stories. Young uns, talk to your older family members. Badger them, if they are able, to share their stories. We are vibrating with living history. We are the repositories for future generations. We are all these multiple stories. And in our multiplicity, we are a connective hub. And in our connection lies our empathy. In our empathy lies our ability to work and communicate and understand within multiple lenses and context. And being this repository of story, of course, brings me to the story of Bridgerton. It would be churlish not to mention it, wouldn't it? Christmas Day 2020. The one day Christmas Day gathering. Open all windows, wear masks, no touching, ho-ho. A reduced, lonely state of the nation Christmas Day. And yet for those with a Netflix subscription, something burst onto their screens that hadn't really been done before. Costume drama with the widest, brashest of embraces to greet the audience at a time of deep isolation and uncertainty. The Quality Street tin came to life in full day-glow on steroids Regency pomp. No matter your race, your gender, your politics, your sexuality, penchant for a bit of will they, won't they, or a love of a stately pile, a well-turned frock, a Regency quintet does Ariana Grande, Bridgerton offered something for many a viewer. In fact, 82 million households in the first 4 weeks. A wide embrace, along with a few hours light relief from misery and fear. But what delighted me most in the frothy frolic of our show was the great big trademark Shondaland what if at the heart of the story. What if we insert Queen Charlotte into the international best-selling Bridgerton novel series? and put it on the telly, with Queen Charlotte represented in a more historically accurate way, as the descendant of Alfonso III of Portugal and an African woman, possibly from the royal house of Benin, with whom the Portuguese had been trading since the 1400s, expanding access and perspective. What does that insertion open up in the narratives of Regency England that we don't talk about, don't teach, and certainly don't put into drama? Of course, we always have the slavery, and clearly there is no Georgia or Charlottesville without this royal pairing, areas historically steeped in slavery. And yet at the same time, if we stay out of the plantation and are in the court, we still know there was much disparaging comment made about the mulatto skin, the ugly wide nose, and the thick lips of Charlotte of the House of Mecklenburg-Strelitz on her arrival in Britain. The same Charlotte, by the way, whose tradition of the Christmas tree she brought with her from Europe, a tradition we have all heartily embraced ever since. Prince Albert Schmalbert. Charlotte is the Christmas tree fairy. So, the what if takes the mixed African heritage queen and places her squarely within a Shonda Rhimes costume drama for Netflix, and watch the impact of that fact across the narrative. It's not an uncompromising forensic documentary on life around the nation in Regency Britain, but as a delightful provocation, it opens up the conversation about the history we are taught and not taught, and the way we continue to travel as a nation through the world with our compass needle not reading true north because of the incomplete stories we are navigating by. Similarly, however intense the numerical presentation of people of colour in the show, as intense as an electric orange Featherington frock, that offensive phrase, colour-blind casting, does not apply to Bridgerton. The only colour-blind show that I have seen on screen recently was the David Copperfield that Armando Iannucci directed with Dev Patel. That was colour-blind casting. It's still a horrid phrase. The colour I am is the colour I play. And to know more, in the prequel, Queen Charlotte, which we shot earlier this year, the story of the arrival of the young Queen Charlotte, the young Lady Danbury, and the young Violet Bridgerton at court is explored in fabulous detail. But it is the real-life stories that embolden and reassure our drama. We know of the first black sheriff in the United Kingdom, Nathaniel Wells, born to his slave owner father, William Wells, and an enslaved woman known as Jordine Wells. He was born in 1779 on a plantation on St. Christopher Island, St. Kitts. He was born a slave, but in 1783 he was freed by his father and sent to England to be educated. When his father, William Wells, died in 1794, he left the vast majority of his estate to Nathaniel and freed Jordine. Nathaniel Wells inherited an estate worth £200,000 in 1794. Rich, including several plantations and many slaves. Sadly, he was a typical absentee plantation owner, and the rates of death and the levels of abuse on his plantations were high. He purchased Peacefield House on an estate that is now part of Chepstow Racecourse, and later married Harriet Este, the daughter of a chaplain to King George II in 1801. He went on to become the sheriff and deputy lieutenant of Monmouthshire, a justice of the peace, a lieutenant in the yeoman cavalry of Gloucester and Monmouth, and the church warden of St. Arvan's. He had 20 children, 2 wives. Whew. That's 20 mixed heritage children marrying into the middle orders of aristocracy in the early to mid-1800s. We were here. Nathaniel Wells was here. Though there are no portraits of him, there are records, including the records of the compensation he received for his plantations at the time of the abolition of slavery. Compensation for loss of income. In France, Treading a similar path to Nathaniel Wells was the dashing Joseph Boulogne, aka Chevalier de Saint-Georges. The illegitimate son of a wealthy French plantation owner and an enslaved African Guadeloupean woman, Joseph Boulogne was born between 1739 and 1749 on the island of Basse-Terre in western Guadeloupe, where Death in Paradise is filmed. When Joseph was about 10, he and his mother followed his father and the rest of his legitimate family back to France, where Boulogne was enrolled in elite schools and received private lessons in music and fencing. A painting depicting a match between Boulogne and the Chevalier d'Éton remains on display at Buckingham Palace. Boulogne's extraordinary fencing talent led Louis XV to name him Chevalier de Saint-Georges. He was a court composer, a conductor, a violin virtuoso and child prodigy. In later years, Boulogne would host another child prodigy under his roof as he toured the royal courts of Europe, a 6-year-old Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, some of whose early compositions are said to clearly imitate phrases from the compositions of Joseph Boulogne. I imagine that Chevalier de Saint-Georges would have been Lady Danbury's distant heartthrob as a girl. I mean, come on, he's quite a dish. I had her play a piece of his music on the forte piano in season 2, but it didn't make the final cut. Piano virtuoso, I am not. And as we know from the unfinished novel by Jane Austen Sanditon, written contemporaneously, there were West Indian heiresses here too in the Hanoverian period, who were married by impoverished British nobles to restore the aristocratic coffers. In fact, in the spirit of opening out these stories to wider audiences, with my production company, I'm currently developing with Sony and Longboat Pictures the story of the life of one such extraordinary enslaved woman, Dorothy Kirwan Thomas, based on the novel Island Queen by Vanessa Riley. There she is. Dorothy bought herself and 20 members of her family out of slavery through her own brilliant business acumen. She successfully challenged the British government plan in Parliament to raise taxes on free black businesswomen at a higher rate than for any other group. Dorothy funded schools for girls here, and earlier had had an affair in the West Indies with the then Prince William, later William IV, immortalised at the time by the caricaturist James Gilray in January 1788. Perhaps this eased her entree when she set sail for England. These stories, Nathaniel Wells, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, Dorothy Kirwan Thomas, the dramatic infillings of history, these stories are important. When a burly African-American security guard gives me the full sweep to the ground curtsy as I enter a building in Atlanta earlier this summer, I know these stories have meaning and have an uplifting impact. When a gay member of the aristocracy quizzes me on when there will be a full-out gay love story on Bridgerton because they long to be seen in that context, I know these stories are important. When young black men in Brixton, not the expected historical romance demographic, I would suggest, give me the nod, when young women in hijabs in John Lewis come giggling up for selfies, and immigration staff in Accra greet me shyly as their daughter, Lady Danbury, and Korean mothers attending graduation at Harvard insist on hugging me, I know our frothy drama is also validating people who, like all of us, want to be seen and heard. We are expanding access and perspective, and thrillingly, expectation. Story is meaningful. To be in the story or not in the story has impact. This is me at Badminton House, home of the horse trials and the Beaufort Hunt, and an estate some 5 miles from where I grew up in the Cotswolds. We just shot Lady Danbury's soirée for Daphne in season 1. Here in Badminton House was a huge painting of Queen Charlotte, a painting just up the road from me all through my childhood. And I reflected on how meaningful it would have been for little me in the 1960s Cotswolds to have known that this painting existed, that Queen Charlotte was also of mixed heritage, harking back to Africa. What an encouragement for a child who saw no recognizably English images that embraced rather than othered her. My recent discovery's delight is clearly on my face. And as for me, so for many other excluded peoples, allowed finally to be seen in a history in which people who looked like them, like me, were clearly always part of the story. In the paintings by royal portraitist Sir Alan Ramsay, unlike the likenesses painted by other artists of the day, Charlotte's African ancestry is much more present, as we see here and here. Both images were a great encouragement for my creation of Lady Danbury. And who is my Lady Danbury? Well, you've met her already. In Jessie Pickering, my grandmother. In Grace Hagan, my aunt. In Jackie Ripley, my mum. And there she is. As we say so often, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before. These women are the shoulders on which Lady Danbury stands. Courageous, dynamic, independent, following their own lights, all at some point raising children alone, all fabulous with their careers, their delights and their tastes, none backward in coming forward. For me, Lady Danbury is a love letter to these courageous, pioneering women in my family and beyond. And don't we all recognize those women from somewhere in our own lives? As is so often the way in drama, elements from our lives are melded into the characters we create, who tell their own story, but whose story, at its best, may chime with the stories of others in new and unexpected ways. So finally, in the words of another woman, unexpected in her ways and not backwards in coming forward, our great leader Truss, let's talk about cheese. It's nearly panto season, bear with me. What cheese is good for luring bears out of their caves? Excellent! What cheese stares in the mirror talking to itself? Excellent! What cheese is good for hiding horses? Mascarpone! Why? Because I like cheese jokes. I like terrible dad jokes. I like Christmas cracker jokes. These are from the first AD on a slow day on set. So I ask, who of me do you shut down when you define me only by a portion of who I am? A portion of what I have experienced, a portion of what I have come to understand and delight in, like cheese jokes. We are, each one of us, in the story of our rich entirety, a glory and a miracle, perfect and sufficient. I am for the wide embrace and against the sharp-elbowed. I am for enough and against more. I am for contributing and against winning. I am for slow engagement and against snap judgment. I am, I hope, for everyone. One flesh, one heartbeat, one story in all its variety, all striving to survive in love, in joy, in safety, on our one burning ball of gas. Towards the end of Richard II, as he reflects on his life while awaiting his inevitable death, the deposed king, in his prison cell, finally understands his worth. But whate'er I be, nor I, nor any man that but man is, with nothing shall be pleased, till he be eased with being nothing. nothing and everything. We and all our stories are worthy. I hope in this year, in our different ways, you will come swing the lens with me, and a new story will emerge where you and I will become we.
Thank you very much, Adjoa, for that suggestive and exciting talk. Listening to it, I'm going to open it up in a second, but I was very struck by something Coleridge once said, which was there were two kinds of great imagination in art. There was the Shakespearean and there was the Miltonic. The Shakespearean entered into the lives of others. The Miltonic took everything and turned it into itself. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that art in your terms is very much the first. Do you have any time for the second?
Well, I think you need to give me a stronger definition by what you mean by turns it into itself.
That the identity of the artist is so overpowering that all material gets sucked in and seen through his or her lens, rather than your image of swinging the lens.
I think we do all of it, to be honest. I think I sort of triangulate. I sort of think about the writer, I think about the character, I think about me, and then I think between us, we make another thing, which we give to the audience. And then the audience brings themselves to the thing we make, and then it becomes yet another thing. So I think there's a great drawing in of self, and there's a great sharing out, so that everybody, you know, that's what I love about live theatre. It's never the same on any given performance, you know. Maybe it's raining, maybe the cast have had a row, maybe there's been a delay. Whatever it is, you know, maybe somebody just died or we won a football match or something. But that energetically, every show is different. So you have your version of who you think you are, or where you think the play's going, or what it's saying, or what its dynamic or shape is. But then it has to meet with the living, breathing other people in the conversation, and then everything can shift again. I don't know that answers your question, Fram.
No, I think it does. I was very struck when you said the colour that I am is the colour that I play.
Yeah.
Are you sympathetic to that famous old story of Laurence Olivier saying to Dustin Hoffman, dear boy, what about trying acting?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great, because there's something... you know, there's the warm-up that is the Telegraph crossword and a coffee. That is that's one version of a warm-up, and then other people will go into some other dark place where they have to get lost and re-emerge. I think, you know, there are all sorts of routes to the performance that you make. But I am always of, you know, when you're on stage, your brain is doing that fabulous thing of you are in the character, you are in the story, you are in the moment. You're also aware if someone's just come in late over there, that light's not really, oh God, I'm shadowing so-and-so. You know, your head is doing all the technical stuff at the same time, because your intent is to tell a good story. If someone's being shadowed, that takes the audience out of, oh my God, the dog's just been left in the car. You know, and they're like, oh, there's a shadow on that person's face. Oh, you know, if there's something going on there, is that going to be a distraction? Your job is to communicate the story to the audience. And so you have to work on all different levels. If you're doing Shakespeare, you have to be textually on point, and you have to do it in such a way that you're not beating the audience with Shakespeare, going, look how smart I am. Don't you get what he's talking about? What's wrong with you? You want to illuminate and open and share. So that's the gig, and everything that you do has to be towards that end.
And is there a paradox between Shakespeare's famous invisibility being part of his greatness and the essence of bringing yourself to a part? Shakespeare doesn't seem to be bringing himself.
Oh, I think he's everywhere.
Do you think he is?
Yeah, I think he's like this. I said it 3 times, pay attention to it. There's a lot of that going on.
But you don't know who he is.
I am
Or do you feel you do?
I am not interested. I am interested in who he tells us we are. That's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in how we can come to understand something of the richness of ourselves through him. And as I said, with Richard III, when I first read it, I was completely outraged because, you read it at that level and then you start to read it at a different level. And so I love him because I think with the greatest stories, as with the greatest films or pieces of music or greatest pieces of art, you can return to them over and over again and they shift in meaning as you shift.
Sure.
That's the delight.
That's a good moment to open it out. Questions? And we'll bring a microphone over there.
Thank you so much. What 3 tips do you have for us in respect of how we can tell powerful stories?
Well, I suppose the first thing is a willingness to engage on that. Engage in that in an open-hearted, frank way. It depends who you are telling. Who's the we? When you say we, who do you mean?
Us, as in individuals.
You as an individual?
Yes.
Well, I think stories, you don't have to tell a powerful story, you just have to tell an open-hearted story, and then its power will be what it is with whoever receives it. So you could tell the story to somebody and they'll be like, uh-huh. And you can tell the story to someone else and they'll be like, oh, that's my story, how did you know? Or you can tell it to somebody else and they'll go, I'm so sorry. It impacts differently, but I think open-heartedness is a huge key. I was a bereavement counsellor at a hospice in South London, and getting the death story from clients who would come was an absolutely crucial, fundamental part of any counselling series of sessions, because in the telling of the story, at whatever pace was needed, but in great detail, you could feel people emotionally shifting and leaning back into what happened at the time and how they felt and how it's impacting them now. And so laying out the story is such a fun. It's like putting good footings into the ground before you build a house. I don't know that's not 3 tips. Sorry.
Anyone else?
There's a lady over here.
Hello, Professor. Thank you so much for your talk. Oh, can you hear me okay?
Just a bit louder for me.
All right. Thank you so much for your talk. I have 2 questions, if I'm allowed. The first is about the Future World's Literary Prize. Could you please speak a bit more about why...
About the Future...
World's Literary Prize?
Oh, the Future World's Prize.
Yes. Could you please speak a bit more about what was the inspiration behind creating this prize? And my second question for you was with regards to the story you're directing about the woman who was formerly enslaved and
Dorothy Cohen Thomas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Could you please speak a bit more about what particularly about her story did you want to bring to life? Why did you want to share her story with a wider audience?
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just do a quick one about Future World's Prize. There is a website, inevitably. I haven't looked at it, I don't know how good it is, but it is there. And we are taking, we're soliciting manuscripts at the moment. The reason that Ben Aronovich, he wrote a series of books called Rivers of London, enormously popular. I was on a judging panel for the Kane Prize. I was quite involved with that for a long time, which is African diasporic writers. And somebody asked me to be a judge on this new prize that was going to be coming. So I was a judge for 1 year, and I thought it was such a fantastic idea. I said to Ben, let's give it a new title, let's launch it, let's give it some, and focus its purpose. So that's what we did. And why? I think I mean, I'm not a Trekkie or anything like that, but I do think that science fiction and speculative fiction, there's such a space to talk about the world, talk about the possibilities of worlds, to reflect on our world while not being in the middle of it. So I record loads of audiobooks, which I love doing it. And so I get to read books I wouldn't normally have time to pick up. And I remember reading a book by a guy called Alistair Reynolds, who is a Welsh physicist. And of course, I can't remember the name of the book now. It was there, it's gone. But there was a scene where an East African astronaut with a speciality in elephants, an AI in the body of an 8-year-old Chinese girl, and a blue whale were having a conversation. I mean, they passed the Bechdel test, no problem. They were having a conversation about science. And I had to pause and just do that for a minute. Because it was so wonderful. It was so thrilling to be having this conversation with these extraordinary characters. And it's just a possibility that science fiction and speculative fiction have as a conversation that I was really interested in. And I was very conscious of this sort of dearth of writers of colour doing that work at the time. That's the prize website. Dorothy Cohen-Thomas, there's a book called The Island Queen by Vanessa Riley. Why I wanted to tell that story, I was just astonished by this woman. She was a slave on an Irish plantation called Demerara. And because she was brilliant, she brought herself and 20 members of her family out of slavery and stayed alive, kept her children alive, came to Britain to petition Parliament because they were going to whack these taxes on black women, business women, who had all got themselves out of... I mean, duh, it's a fantastic story. She set schools up over here. And, you know, she had an affair with William. We don't know these stories. I want us to, you know, I hate Black History Month. I'm doing a talk tomorrow. I hate Black History Month. I want all the history all the time. I don't want Black History Month. I want to know everybody's history all the time. I don't want things parcelled off into... And I hate the tick box thing of, we've done Black History Month, now let's get on with real life. No, all of it, all the time. History's really important. It's really interesting. And it's just our stories. So, yeah, there we are.
Someone
there? Gentleman there. Oh, someone right at the back.
Should I hold it? Or... Hi,
Hello.
Thank you. That was really inspirational, literally everything you said. Me and my friend, we're both students at drama school, and we're graduating.
Good luck.
Best piece of advice for a young actress, POC actress, going into the industry. Yeah.
Are you asking me for a piece of advice?
Yeah, just a piece of advice from your experience. Anything.
Is there anything else you like doing?
Yeah, actually.
It's kind of a serious question. It's a brutal, horrible, venal, superficial industry that can create the most beautiful, heartfelt, inspirational work. So you have to be able to hold those two things. So when you don't get the job, inevitably, it may happen, just occasionally, but it may. You have to know that when you went in for that job, you were utterly prepared, you were in sympathy with the work that you were being asked to do, that you had a strong sense of what you wanted to communicate and who you were. And then if you don't get the job, you have to let it go. Because maybe you didn't get the job because the casting director is running late and honestly, they're just waiting to see the person they really want to see. It's not you. Maybe the director didn't fancy you. Sorry, it still goes on. Maybe you were too tall, too dark, too thin, too fat, too anything that's not, and it's nothing to do with you. So you have to have a Teflon, iron cast sense of yourself, your ability, your worth, the level of preparation that you have laid out for this audition, and then you have to find a way to let it go. If you find that way, tell me, because I still haven't.
No, I've done it like maybe 3 times.
Say that again?
I've done it like 3 times in the year that I've been at drama school, but aside from that, I'm struggling like all the time to let go of prep. It's hard.
Well, darling, just welcome to the world of being an actor.
Yeah.
But you know, here's my thing. As I said, I swing the lead every day. I don't feel like I'm working. I feel utterly blessed. I know most people in the world do not have the privilege of spending their day doing the thing that makes their heart soar. And I do. So if you can find a way to stick with it, have you any other skills, because you're going to need to earn a living, don't try and live in London. It's impossible. You know, if you can hold your nerve, then stick with it. Because for me, being an actor is about stamina at the end of the day and holding on to your joy and practice your craft. If you're out of work, do play readings with friends. Write something, put something up, stay engaged. Because there will be lots of times when you just feel like, am I just a barista now? Is that my life? I went to I've been paying this off for ages on my barista wages, thank you. You know, there'll be lots of times like that, and you have to stay with your heart in the place that made you thrilled about applying to drama school.
Thank you.
I think probably one last question. We could be here forever.
Chap's had his arm up all day.
Could I ask you a question about casting in the theatre now? Yes. I mean, I don't know if you saw Cush Jumbo's Hamlet. I mean, there was a lot of talk beforehand that this was a woman playing Hamlet and a person of colour.
Yeah.
And if you saw the play...
I didn't. It was at the Young Vic, wasn't it?
It was at the Young Vic.
Yeah.
But I mean, seeing the play, of course, you didn't think about that. It was just an actor playing Hamlet.
Yeah.
And nowadays, people have moved a long way in accepting colourblind casting, but casting is still a political issue. I mean, there was a lot of controversy over casting of Jewish characters at the Royal Court. And so my question is, what are the rules now, and how should this be approached? Should anyone be able to play any role, or should some roles be reserved for people of particular ethnicity or colour?
Do you know, the person that can answer that question 100% can retire. It's freighted. It's really complicated. And I think there's a sort of smell test that I mean, there are lots of things you're asking me in that. So I didn't see Cush's, the production that Cush was playing Hamlet in. But for my taste, well, people say playing Richard II or playing Richard III, and I've played Casca and I've played Ulysses. There are some parts where you go, is gender really important here for the story? If it's really important and you're changing the gender, you need to understand why you're doing that and what it is you want to do with that. If it's not important for the story, I don't care. Play the character. What are they scared of? What do they want? What do they love? Who do they need? Who do they fear? Play the desires of the character and engage in that way. And frankly, I think as we get further into the 21st century, there's a whole new generational attitude to things where I think people are more, tell me the story. You know, that's the purpose, tell the story. So that's that. Differently abled people, so, you know, I'm playing Richard III. There's going to be a lot of smackdown for me about that because people will go, only disabled actors should play that character now. Well, I want to have a different conversation. I want to have a conversation that's about the pathologizing of the human body and the body that you say, oh, you're in my gang, yes, you can come. You, no, you're bad, look at you, you're evil. And when you ascribe negative, so I'm having that conversation. So I think it's complicated and it's freighted, and it's always going to be a smell test in the end. Does it sniff right? And actually, go and ask people from the community that you're delving into. What's the sniff like here? And pay attention and listen to what you're told. I think there's a lot to be said for just being really open about things like that. I suppose for me, everything is about what's your intent? Why are you staging things in a particular way? Don't really. Some things I think you can do what you like with the casting. I think you can have a mix of casting in lots of, when I was doing restoration comedy, it wasn't about race, it was just about there were lots of us and we really liked the play and we really wanted to do it, so we did it. And you could see the casting there was no significant anything about it. And that wasn't important. So I think you have to always go back to the first principle of what is your intent, what is your perspective, what is the perspective you're wishing to share, what do you want the audience to understand? And then you do that, but predominantly your job is to entertain, to engage, to inform, tell the story well. So you can be significant with your casting or whatever it is you like. If it ain't a great show, it ain't a great show.
I think this has been a great show. And sadly, it's got to come to an end, or people will die of hunger.
Yes, don't die of hunger on my